Hi, I'm Kimberly, and welcome to As I've Seen It. If you're like me, you are probably completely tired of the US presidential campaign. But now we finally reached the part that I dearly love, voting. Love voting, love it, love it, love it. At least 4 million people have already engaged in early voting. My state is one of those early voting states, so I'm excited, can't wait to vote. It's going to be awesome. Now, what makes it a little bit different this year is the Republican nominee. From the stage of the third debate, he horrified his opponent, most of the press corps, and a lot of normal Americans because he wouldn't say that he will absolutely accept the results of this race if he loses. It's almost impossible to rig a national election in the United States. The other thing that he's saying that bugs me and bugs a lot of people of color, he is asking his supporters to go to polls, not their own polls, go vote, in your own poll, then go to other polls and watch. He has named Cleveland, he's named Detroit, he's named Chicago, he's named Philadelphia. When he speaks of the inner cities, he usually within the same sentence switches right into African Americans. Sometimes he throws Hispanics in there as well. But when he says inner city, he means black people. So he has this idea in his head that black people are going to steal the election and give it to Hillary. Where did he get this idea? Sean Hannity would be my guess. Sean Hannity has been declaring that there are whole precincts that Obama won that he probably shouldn't have. See, it boggles Hannity's mind that there are entire precincts within inner cities that are predominantly African American, and every last one of them voted for Obama. That's part one. Part two of the Hannity and Fox News machine is that there was interference from the new Black Panther Party. Two guys in Philadelphia stood outside a polling place, and people from Fox News and some of the biggest conspiracy theorists claimed that these two guys were there to intimidate white voters. Since that time, 2008, Fox News and Sean Hannity have continued to perpetuate the myth that there is widespread voter fraud and or intimidation. Not happening. The only people trying to keep folks away from the polls would be Republicans. Trump is convincing his voters to go to the polls and basically watch brown and black folk. And I'm not making this up. It's on tape. The Boston Globe also interviewed a Trump supporter, and this guy told the reporter that he planned to engage in racial profiling. His words, not mine. He said that he will be looking for Mexicans and Syrians. There are people of color all over the United States who are watching these rallies, who are watching these statements, these videos from Trump as he instructs his followers to go out and, basically keep an eye on the polls, his heavily armed followers, because there's a long history of intimidating brown and black folks at the polls. Indulge me for a moment as I take you back. Toward the end of the Civil War, when President Lincoln knew for sure that the Union was going to win, of course, he began to think about what would happen afterwards, what would become of the country. His desire was to return the country to normal as quickly as possible, as opposed to many in his party who wanted to punish the South. They wanted to make the South suffer for the bloodshed. Within days of the war ending, Lincoln was assassinated. Once the Union realized that Lincoln had been assassinated by a rabid Confederate supporter, they saw red, and they wanted to destroy the South. The South fought back by attacking the most vulnerable people. The Klan formed for the sole purpose of terrorizing the newly freed slaves. These newly freed people who had absolutely nothing had to contend with these guys. What threw gasoline on that fire? Giving black men the vote. The 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to vote. The Klan couldn't stand it and waged a terror campaign that lasted for a century, basically. And it wasn't only the Klan. There were white citizens' councils all over the South. There were individuals who intimidated black and brown voters. People didn't have to belong to a group, they just had to be white supremacists. Generations of African Americans suffered through voter intimidation at the polls, whether that was through poll tax, through literacy tests, through beatings, through lynchings. During my lifetime, people died so that I would have the right to vote. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, these were projects initiated by John F. Kennedy. Kennedy didn't live to see them brought to fruition. It was President Johnson who signed both acts. The U.S. Supreme Court struck down part of that historic Voting Rights Act in 2013. States went full steam ahead with voter ID laws and anything else they could think of to make it more difficult for minorities to vote. And that brings us to today. So in addition to a dozen or so states having restrictive voter ID laws, we also have a candidate telling people, go watch the polls in the inner city because that's where we think there's going to be trouble. So Donald Trump has hired a guy named Mike Roman. Remember I told you about that video with the new Black Panther Party from back in 2008? Well, Mike Roman is the person who sold it to Fox News. They put it out there, and since then, he's sort of been the one who's out there screaming voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud. He writes a lot for Breitbart. He's on right-wing websites. This is the guy that Trump hired. No one is going to stay home because of Donald Trump or his poll watchers. What he's going to get is probably resistance, just like he did in Chicago. I mentioned Chicago because it shows that the resistance to a Trump presidency is multi-ethnic, it's multiracial, and it can be mobilized. So these folks, they're coming out to vote. Donald Trump also underestimated the power of Univision and one of its anchors, Jorge Ramos. Jorge Ramos has one of the largest audiences on television. At a press conference, Mr. Ramos stood up to ask Donald Trump some questions. Trump was quite rude to him, had security remove him from the hall. Not only does Jorge Ramos have a large audience, Univision has kept that audience well informed about this election. These people are going to turn out to vote. So civil rights groups, paired with legal groups, paired with actual lawyers, will be around in some of these precincts to answer questions. They will be there to inform people of their rights. They will be there to make sure that these poll watchers don't cross the line into voter intimidation. Voter intimidation is a federal crime. So, Donald, you've underestimated the country, as usual. You're not going to keep anybody from voting. No one's afraid of you. No one's afraid of your poll watchers. Bring it on. Thanks for watching.